Hi, I'm Paul Wessels, President and CEO of Western Copper and Gold. Western Copper and Gold has the large casino copper gold project up in the Yukon. Been developing it for about 12 years. Been an exciting past 3 years, brought new resource out 3 years ago. And then last year, brought on Rio Tinto as a partner. And so exciting times.
It is exciting. Thanks very much for coming on the show. We did a technical due diligence session with you in December. I recommend people look at that link below to that, folks. And what was happening in December? It was $1.75 share price, now $3. Not too bad. What do you put that down to?
Yeah, no, it's been a nice run, and there's a couple things that I started to. I mean, first of all, it is the investment by Rio Tinto. When this came out, it came out in May of last year, and you issue a cryptic news release that's reviewed by 100 lawyers. As we've gotten out and explained, what that deal actually is, I think people begin to realize, okay, look, what we've signed with Rio is a due diligence process. And, at that time, we were about halfway through it. Now we're getting pretty close to the end. So I think that's part of what's moved the share price. The other thing has been copper. Copper has continued to be a good story. I mean, we've seen, obviously, the copper price has been strong, but, the stories around inventories, the continual dialogue around the requirement for critical minerals. I mean, in Canada, the government came out, identified $3.8 billion for infrastructure to develop critical minerals, increase the tax credit for flow-through funds around critical minerals, and copper is one of those. So I think, around copper, you've just seen a lot of excitement, a lot of investors. I know this from talking to investors. They're really liking copper right now.
Yeah, and as they should, as you say, big infrastructure projects all around the world, Europe, US, China, everywhere, and on the battery thematic still continues to run. But I'm interested in the kind of the dynamics of how making an announcement around Rio and we talked at length about what precisely they would need to see from you. But when the price of the stock just jumps like it's hockey stick time. People get super, super excited, right? And you then had from June last year through to December, steady run down. The types of messaging that you're getting from the market at that point was, is the company doing something wrong? Have I bought into the wrong thing? And obviously, and we'll talk a second about what's happened from December to now, but what was that ride like for you? Were you having to have conversations that you weren't expecting to?
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, I think there was some initial confusion about exactly the deal that we had with Rio, because it was this, this is an exploration investment. I mean, because these strategic investments, often that's what they're for. Oh, here's some money, go do some exploration. Hopefully you make it bigger. That's not what this was about. This was really about a due diligence process that Rio wanted to execute. The majority of their rights are in place for 18 months, so those expire this November. And, it's, talking to you, talking to investors, talking to others, and, as that sort of got out, I think people began to, light bulb went off. Okay, well, so this is heading towards something pretty exciting happening in 2022. And that's still the case.
Right. Okay. But there was a big sell-off, I guess, from who?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, and again, it was what's interesting when you unpack what our share price did in 2021 is that we had two things happen. Obviously, Rio, this big sort of imprint on our share price. The other thing was the copper. And so copper, sort of all copper equities boomed up at the beginning of the year. And then there was a bit of a sell-off, even though, I mean, the copper price pulled back a little bit, but not equal to the sell-off that you saw. And I think this was old-fashioned profit taking and people sort of saying, the run-up is done. And, I'm going to move on to the next thing. But then I think, like I said, as our sort of story and the sort of fundamentals sort of began to come into play, you started to see our share price go up. And again, this year, and, from December to now, where we've seen, better than a 50% share price increase. I mean, and it's not just us, there's, other good names, simple stories in the copper space that are seeing that same run up. in the copper developer space, such as ourselves.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to understand here, Paul, is how much is the market doing for you in terms of the heavy lifting, and how much of the stuff that you're in control of, say the delivery of a feasibility study at the end of Q2, doing to kind of drive that kind of resurgence in the share price.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been hitting our targets. I mean, we had some great we issued some early drill results in November of last year. I mean, absolutely great results. I mean, 300 meters of over 1% copper equivalent. Another intercept 65 meters of 2.5% copper equivalent. People are like, oh yeah, that's right. There's this nice high grade bit in the middle. Follow that up, about a month ago with the full release of drill results. There's some interesting little tidbits on the outside of the resource. I mean, just, again, reminding people of that. So I think we've been good and consistent at getting those sort of that news out. And consistent also. I mean, these haven't been news releases, but again, talking to investors, various public releases around, where we are with Rio Tinto, how that is progressing. And, I mean, the short answer is we are enjoying a very good relationship with them. And all of the feedback I'm getting so far is that, what they came to look at is proving out. And, if you look at our news release on the drill results, I mean, there's one sentence there that everybody I hope reads, which is, these results confirm and or improve upon our understanding of the grades within the resource, and that's absolutely key.
It is absolutely key, but they've got 18 months to make their mind up. In the meantime, they're doing acquisitions elsewhere at Turquoise Hill, for example. Does that distract them from what they're doing with you, or is that kind of factored into the time frame which they've allowed themselves?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is of course, right? I mean, it's I mean, we asked them point blank. We're like, oh, is this gonna sort of distract you? Oh, no. I mean, we're a big company. We can, walk and chew gum at the same time. And it was like, yeah, but it's distracting them a little bit, but that's okay. I mean, we're still not through the diligence part here. I mean, we're still working on the MET program is the last bit to be done, and so we're about halfway through that. Well, actually, a little bit farther than halfway at this point in time. But so that's okay. I mean, we don't need their banking team yet. It's the technical team that we're really talking to.
Well, absolutely. The yet bit's really, really important there, because since I've been talking to you, I think we perceive this as being a big project, Copper Gold project. The gold's a byproduct, but a significant byproduct in terms of value. It's also a high capex project, albeit with a very high NPV. And obviously the movement in the last, I guess, four months has been advantageous. With a large capex at 250 million market cap company as was, that's a difficult conversation to be had, but maybe it's one for later. So what have you been doing? You put out some drill results recently. The grades are better than they were because it was long life, kind of low margin type stuff. What does the new drilling do for the new feasibility study in terms of stepping up from the PEA or the previous studies? Is it going to be different or more of the same?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So let's talk about the new feasibility study. I mean, the drilling, like I said, was confirmatory drilling. So the resource is not going to change that significantly. There's a few little tweaks here and there, but it's more in sort of second decimal place sort of changes. But the feasibility, I mean, what's different with the feasibility studies from our PEA? Our PEA came out in June of last year, and it's almost a year sort of to the day from the PEA to the feasibility study. And so, I mean, for the most part, it's an update, but there's a couple of things. I mean, particularly around the gold heap leach. We are looking at actually doing a finer crush, which will give us a higher recovery. So we think that will improve the economics of the overall project. That's probably the big one. There's a couple other sort of small bits and pieces, but really this is about getting this back to a feasibility level design. And why that's important is certainly Rio, who's doing their diligence, is looking at this, but I mean there's a number of groups sort of circling around looking, and a PA is a PA. They really want to see, what does this look like with the feasibility study? what is when they drill down into the design, what do all those bits and pieces look like? So there's certainly, a few groups out there that, we're chatting with that are waiting for this feasibility study to come out.
Right. But okay, there's a constant debate in chat rooms, when, and people argue both sides of this with equal fervor around what big companies are looking for. Because let's face it, you're building something here that a mid-tier or large cap is going to have to step in and fund, because it's just the capex is too big. All right. And it's around whether they need feasibility studies or whether they just need the data, because they're going to use their own assumptions and, fill in their own, use the data, fill in their own models, and they're going to work it out their way. So is part of this, the feasibility, just for the market so you can drive share price, market cap, value up to help with your conversations down the line, which you're going to have with either presumably a Rio, a Barrick, a Newmont, a BHP. Is that what you're doing it for?
Well, and I think there's a nugget of truth in what you're saying there. I mean, it certainly puts you. I mean, I think that. Okay, so let me unpack that in a couple ways. I think it is an absolute fair statement that, let's call them super majors, the Newmonts, the Barricks, the BHPs, the Rios, they're going to take it. They're going to do their own engineering and end up with their own sort of execution plan. That is absolutely true. However, if you have a full feasibility study, you've got a pretty strong negotiating point and a pretty good starting point for those groups as well, because it's a feasibility study. It has a lot of detail. It really nails down the cost. So, I mean, I think it's absolutely true that as you're negotiating, you can say, look, this is a feasibility study. I mean, PEAs are useful, but they're a little bit arm waving exercises. A feasibility study, you can say, well, someone walks in and says, well, I think your capital cost is too low. It's like, well, where? Go through the 200 pages of capital cost build up and tell me where my quote is wrong or where my estimation is wrong, like all those sort of things, as opposed to a PEA where someone sort of, I feel very good about our PEA, but it is just a simpler estimate.
Plus or minus 30%, we say.
Yeah,
PEAs.
exactly.
It's what we could do versus what we should do versus what we will do, right? So
yeah, whereas a feasibility study, you're talking 15.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
Good. And let's be honest, it's never minus 15.
Well, with inflation at the moment raging through the industry, it might be. Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So right. Okay. So I hear what you're saying on that. But the other part of that, so a subliminal part of that, is if Rio doesn't step up in the environment that it's like at the moment, like what their needs are versus the other, whether it be Barrick, BHP, and Newmont, and I guess there's a couple of others that could step up here. They all roughly want the same thing, but they're all doing different stuff. Like we mentioned, so maybe Turquoise Hill is distracting, but there's also budgets. Allowances as well, and we've seen lots of movements, lots of M&A activity. Is that going to play a sort of strong part in, your likelihood of success with not just a Rio conversation, but other types of conversations? Because Rio don't, at the end of this, they've got options, but they don't need to take them. But likewise, neither do you to a very meaningful way.
Yeah, I think that, the one thing that you realize when you're dealing with some of these super majors is just, they are super majors. Rio Tinto dividended $16 billion to their shareholders last year. Like they could take a little bit of that and buy us without even thinking, right? It's just a different scale of magnitude. And so, what I've certainly recognized is that, they're looking past the money part of it. The money part will be important, but that's sort of step one. Step two is, they own it, right? So, if they buy it and own it, then, they got to make sure that, I've spent more time talking about, the relationship with indigenous groups, behavior of government, permitting. I spend more time talking about that than metallurgy and resource.
With Rio. not
with
just
Rio,
right,
and
not generally.
certainly
Okay.
some of the other groups as well. I mean, they can all look at the resource. They can soon look at the feasibility study. That they make a decision quite quickly on that. And so, I mean, if we're still having a conversation after that, it's okay. So, what does the permitting track look like? How do the local communities and local First Nations feel about this project? All of those sort of things are very, very important. And I think that, I mean, to be honest, that's why Rio is at this stage with us, is because I personally think we've done a very good job at making sure that the Yukon government, the local communities, and the First Nations, we've brought them along. I mean, it's taken us a while, but we've brought them along in terms of the conversation and understanding the project and the advantages and most importantly, have woven them in to our decisions moving forward. And we talk about the feasibility study. I mean, this is all great, the super majors and that, but we need to not lose focus of the probability of those things happening are good, but if they don't happen, we need to keep marching the project forward. And so with that, we need a feasibility study to get into permitting, to be blunt.
Okay. And I saw the the update on the schedule of environmental and socio-economic effects in there, which kind of, it's a big conversation that's going on, obviously, between you and Rio, that's fine. But it's also much more broadly, people are starting to understand the importance of ESG, not just as a kind of badging exercise or eco logo as a badging exercise, but as a means of confirming or rather, well, it is confirming the likelihood of a project to be able to, get built out, to get funded. We were speaking with a consultancy group who deals with it, saying, well, actually, do you know what? Activism and some of the actions by First Nations, wherever they be in the world, are actually good for mining. They're good for investors and they're good for mining because it holds mining to a higher standard. And I thought that was a really good argument, and I totally agree with the case for that. It's not very nice at the time, but miners need to do better. And I guess Rio spending a disproportionate amount of time talking about that rather than metallurgical factors would tell you that that's true.
Well, I was in college in the 90s, and that was when environmental movements started, right? I mean, I always refer to myself as a closet environmentalist. I mean, I don't want to build a mine that's, an eyesore and a long-term liability to any part, particularly, Canada, where, I was born and raised. And so I agree with that. I mean, I think on one side you've got industry, on the other side, you've got these NGOs and sometimes mixed with Indigenous groups. And it's an interesting balance. And it's actually, in the Yukon, it's quite interesting because they tend to be very local. Obviously the Indigenous groups are local, but the environmental groups, there's a number of local environmental groups, and I do community meetings, and they come up and they hit me with all these points, and I'm like, look, that's why I'm here. I'm here. It's like a debate. I don't sit there and nod and smile and say, yeah, that sounds great, Paul. Push me on these things. Ask me these questions, and because I take them back, and we modify our project. I mean, a perfect example is our tailings facility. So one of the differences between, we had a feasibility study in 2013 and the feasibility study now is the complete redesign on the feasibility study. And that complete redesign is a result of actually a whole process we went through, which was the Yukon government, federal government, the regulator, and all of the impacted First Nations. And we all sat down. It's called the Best Available Tailings Technology process. 2 years, it's not really exciting, and that's not a press release that moves stock, but we've got a better design. Everyone agrees with that, and that's because of that sort of back and forth debate with NGOs.
Yeah,
and Indigenous groups. Yeah.
Absolutely, no, I totally agree, and a lot more of that. And again, it was a sort of joking conversation with another group about when they yet again are ranked number one by the Fraser Institute. That gets thrown at you. It's like there is no easy way to get a mine across the line these days, wherever you're on the way. If we look down at Chile, because we've been hunting for like good copper projects, right? We're trying to say, well, okay, what's the next big thing? You're going down South America, where the historically has produced a lot of copper and continues to. You've got elections going on. You've got governments which are talking a socialist agenda just to, I guess, garner votes at the next election. You're talking about increased taxes, tax regimes for miners in those countries, political unrest more broadly, and NGO activism. It's a tough gig, and it's a very tough narrative for South America at the moment. And then there are others saying, look, it's always been like this all over the world. This is nothing new, but I think people are being made aware or heightened awareness. What's the case in Canada, certainly up in the Yukon for you guys? Has it always been difficult, or have you noticed a sort of rise?
Well, I mean, the first thing I point out is I don't think Canada is nationalizing mining anytime soon. So I think everyone's going to relax with that.
Well, I don't know. Trudeau's making a few noises.
Yeah, well, like I said, making noises about critical minerals.
I think he's lucky for I think he's talking about fossil fuels, but yes.
I won't go down that, but
don't.
Yeah, I mean, the pushback on a jurisdiction like the Yukon, and I would say for Canada and the U.S. in particular, is the permitting timelines, and It's interesting that we were talking about NGOs, because like the past year, it's all I've been talking about. And before that, it wasn't much. Like it's really, really topical. And, the sort of the whole ESG part of the business. And so in the Yukon, it's the timelines that it takes. And, people would go through, I'd go through the presentation with an investor, and they'd come to me and they'd say, Paul, what's the chance that this gets permitted? And I'd say 100%. I said, but you're not asking me the right question. The real question is, what is the chance that this, right now I'm saying that we'll get through the regulatory process once we've put an application in, which is Q2 next year, should be about 3 years. What's the chance that it's 3 years versus the chance that it's 4 versus chance that it's 5? I mean, and there's certainly reasonable percentage that it gets dragged out an extra year. But the chance, if you say 10 years, if I have a big pot of money in 10 years, I can get pretty much any project permitted in Canada. I mean, it's a bureaucracy. It's jumping through the hoops. It's making the changes. It's dealing with the local groups. I mean, you can screw it up, but I mean, if you don't screw it up, it's just a time game and working with the bureaucracies.
But for you, the cost of the money would be highly relevant. For a larger balance sheet like a Rio dishing out 16 billion in dividends, less so. So I guess your shareholders are going to say to you is, do you feel that, given the conversations you had with Rio, that they would expect permitting to be in place before they made a move if they saw technically that everything under the ground was as they thought or hoped it would be?
Yeah, I mean, bluntly, I can say no. I mean, because that has never come up. I mean, very, very interested.
So no to what?
What the scenario looks like, but there's been no dialogue around, well, we want you to get this thing permitted.
Got it.
I mean, and I mean, a perfect example is our next door neighbors, right? Next door neighbors is Newmont and the Coffee Project. And so Gold Corp bought that off of Kaminak as they were about to embark on permitting. And so, I mean, that's a perfect example. I mean, they were about to apply, and, Newmont just got that not fully permitted, but fully through the environmental assessment approvals from both the federal and territorial government a month ago. So, I mean,
from when? From start to 4 years. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
But it's a good case study on a couple of levels, right? Okay, so you have not had conversations where they've said we are not going to move forward unless this thing is permitted. They could step in at any point that they felt technically that what was underground.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, we see this. I mean, look at Kinross and Great Bear. I mean, here's an acquisition without even a resource, and at the other end, I mean, so I think you've got a wide range of interest from. I mean, there's no magic sort of point where companies get involved. I mean, I think that there's usually when the initial resource, that's a good point. After a feasibility study, like I said, I mean, you can really, dig down and take a look at it. It's easier to assess. It's a challenge to assess something that doesn't have a resource. It's challenging to assess something that just has a resource as opposed to a feasibility study. And obviously, these are all your de-risking bits, right? And so if it's fully permitted, your risk is pretty low. You're like, okay, it's got its permits, it's got a feasibility study, we can, presumably start construction tomorrow on this. What does that look like? And so, I mean, it's all this sort of risk reward sort of equation that large companies, like these super majors would be looking at.
Right. And so, and what else did so what's the share register look like these days in terms of institutional? Because you were kind of ramping up the institutional side a bit. So where have you got to?
Yeah, I mean, we've got, before we did the equity deal with Rio, which was 25.6 million, and so that was May of 2021. We did an equity raise in November of 2020, and that brought in Fidelity and Copernic and Franklin. So we're beginning to really build up that big institutional base, and we haven't really done any equity since that time. So I mean, some of these bigger funds, I meet with them and they're like, oh well, we need a big position. Of course, I'm like, well, start buying in the, I think if you put a big market order out there, it'll get filled. Yeah, so I mean, there's been a little bit of sort of some groups. I think that's also led to sort of the share price moving up. Obviously, is that there are a couple larger institutionals that are either adding to their position or beginning to assemble a position. But yeah, I mean, and again, those are the groups where the copper story resonates. All the good work we've done on the ground in terms of making sure that the local communities, First Nations, and governments are aligned on this project resonates. No talk of nationalization, and even in the US, I mean, I won't name names, but, you see in the United States, when there's a presidential election and the president changes, permits are revoked for mining projects. And I said, look, regardless of who becomes the next prime minister of Canada, no one's pulling any permits or applications. I mean, that's just, there's no legal mechanism really for that to happen. That's just not the way politics works in Canada. And so it's an advantage, I mean, that Canada has over the United States for these large mining projects.
Yeah, large it is. Well, and what are the kind of, I mean, what are they asking? These institutional shareholders are like stepping in, I want to buy a large position. It's like, have all of their concerns about this being dealt with, like gone away in the sense that they wouldn't be stepping in? They're very cautious people, typically. They're long-term holders that, you've obviously sold them on where this is going. What's the thing that got them over the line? Is it the fact that Rio's still at the table? Is there more to it? Because, like I say, this is confirmatory drilling you're doing at the moment. One assumes the economics aren't going to change too much. 2.3 billion NPV, 8 on it, and just shy of 20% after-tax IRR. It's payback 3 years. It's all kind of good stuff. So nothing's really going to change. But why is this sudden movement and interest? What's driving that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, what I hear at the end, where people are like, oh, I like this. It's we're looking for good copper stories.
Right. So it's the market. They've suddenly realized.
I mean, I used to have this slide in my presentation. Don't have it anymore, but that talked about the junior copper developer space. So let's say you want to look at that space, and I said, there's 15 companies. That's it. Like, I mean, there's not a lot of copper deposits, just period. That there is. And then you start to say, okay, well, I don't want to be in these countries. And, these projects, the economics are a little bit skinny, and on and on and on. And you're down to like 5.
Yeah.
Right. And we're one of the 5.
Yeah. No, I definitely buy that. But here's what I wonder, and, timing is everything. If your project was where it was, let's say 2 years ago, but in this current climate, you wouldn't have had to spend so much money, or possibly even do the Rio deal. I suspect that's what the market is, where the market is at the moment.
Yep.
Interesting. Interesting. Hey, well, good catch up. Good catch up with that. Oh, sorry, we should mention, I guess, Ken Enqvist, COO as well.
Oh, yeah.
Another big move.
Yeah,
because I think last time we spoke, when you and I spoke, you'd made a big hire.
Yeah, no, and he's been a great addition. He's got big mine experience. He's good. He worked on worked for Nevson on Timok and worked for Rio Tinto, for at the beginning of his career as well, and a number of worked on Oyu Tolgoi. So it has all these big copper project experience. So that's one of the key reasons that he's coming in is to build out that team. And again, investment banking 101. Don't quit your day job. Yeah. Keep moving things forward. Yeah. Lots of excitement, lots of discussions on the side, but you got to keep marching the project forward, and that's exactly what we're doing. Feasibility study. I mean, lots of work on permitting. Again, with the goal to get that application in Q2 of next year. But yeah, I mean, lots of discussions on the side with Rio and a few other Rio-like companies. So yeah, we'll see where that.
Yeah, firms your hand up in terms of and those discussions yet to be had further down the line, for sure. So I thought that was an interesting hire. Paul, thanks for the update. Glad to see things are moving along nicely, and you've been strengthening the hand for those discussions when they come. Stay in touch. Let us know how you get on with. When the feasibility study comes out, call me.
Okay, we will do, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's always a pleasure talking, and yeah, I mean it's when we had a little preamble, I'm like, there's not a lot of copper stories. There's not a lot of good copper stories, and there's not a lot of good simple copper stories. And I think right now we're a very good simple copper gold. We even talk about the gold, 21 million ounces. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, so.
Boom.
Leave it at that.